Most people believe America prints money without consequences because of economic strength. They assume the dollar dominates global trade because the U.S. economy produces more goods and services than any competitor. This explanation sounds logical. It appears in textbooks. Economists repeat it on cable news. The explanation is wrong. The dollar does not dominate because America produces the most. It dominates because America controls something every nation on earth needs to buy: oil. In 1974, the United States government signed a secret agreement with Saudi Arabia. The terms stayed classified for 41 years. When Bloomberg journalists filed Freedom of Information Act requests in 2016, Treasury officials finally released the documents. The contents explained 50 years of American foreign policy. Saudi Arabia did not become an American ally through friendship or shared values. The relationship formed through leverage, pure structural leverage. The U.S. Treasury needed a mechanism to maintain dollar demand after President Nixon severed the currency from gold in 1971. Saudi Arabia controlled the largest oil reserves on the planet. The bottleneck was obvious. Every industrial nation required oil. Every barrel of oil would require dollars. The machinery of global energy trade would force every central bank on earth to hold American currency in reserve. Not because they trusted American financial management, because they needed fuel. This was not wealth creation. This was structural extraction. The United States engineered a system where the entire world would finance American deficits, fund American military expansion, and accept American inflation as their own. The system operated invisibly. The system operated permanently. Oil did not make America wealthy. It made America untouchable. Welcome to Rashi Historical. We follow the money, trace the power, and expose the history they never taught you in school. The agreement signed in a Jeddah palace in 1974 still determines your purchasing power today. When you buy groceries, fill your gas tank, or pay your mortgage, you transact in a currency whose value depends on a 50-year-old deal made in secret between Henry Kissinger's Treasury envoy and King Faisal, the current tensions between Israel and Iran, the military bases scattered across the Persian Gulf, the aircraft carrier groups patrolling the Strait of Hormuz. These deployments exist to protect one thing: the petrodollar system. If this system fails, the U.S. government loses its ability to print money without triggering hyperinflation. Your savings account, your retirement fund, your home value, all of it sits on a foundation built during a secret meeting in the Saudi desert. China now buys Saudi oil in yuan. Russia trades energy in rubles. BRICS. Nations discuss alternative payment systems at every summit. The architecture protecting your financial future faces pressure it has never experienced. The 50-year arrangement is fracturing. Understanding how America built this system reveals why Washington will fight so hard to preserve it. The stakes touch every wallet in America. The history starts with a crisis nobody saw coming. By the summer of 1971, the American financial system faced a terminal problem. The problem had grown for decades. The problem had reached breaking point. The Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944 had established the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Representatives from 44 allied nations met in New Hampshire as World War II still raged. They designed a monetary system for the post-war era. The architecture centered on American gold. Foreign governments would hold dollars knowing they could exchange those dollars for gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. The United States possessed the largest gold reserves on Earth. Fort Knox held the foundation of global finance. The United States promised to honor this exchange at any time, in any quantity. The promise anchored the entire international monetary system. The arrangement worked while America ran trade surpluses. Dollars flowed out through foreign aid and military spending. Dollars flowed back through exports. The balance held. Then balance shifted. President Lyndon Johnson escalated the Vietnam War in 1965. Defense spending surged. Johnson simultaneously launched the Great Society domestic programs. Medicare, Medicaid, federal education funding, and urban renewal all required appropriations. Johnson refused to raise taxes to pay for guns and butter simultaneously. He feared tax increases would erode public support for both initiatives. The Federal Reserve printed the difference. Between 1960 and 1971, the number of dollars in circulation more than doubled. Foreign governments noticed. Their treasury departments performed simple arithmetic. The United States promised to exchange dollars for gold at $35 per ounce. The United States had printed far more dollars than it possessed gold to redeem. French President Charles de Gaulle acted first. His economic advisor, Jacques Reff, had warned about dollar overextension for years. De Gaulle announced France would convert its dollar reserves to physical gold. He sent French naval vessels to New York Harbor in 1965, 1966, and 1967. Each time, the ships returned to France carrying pallets of gold bars. Germany accelerated its gold conversions. Switzerland demanded redemptions. Spain, the Netherlands, and Japan queued behind them. The gold reserve at Fort Knox dropped from over $20 billion in the early 1950s to under $10 billion by 1971. Foreign governments held claims exceeding $40 billion. The mathematics guaranteed default. Britain triggered the final crisis. In August 1971, British representatives requested gold conversion of $3 billion. The request represented nearly one-third of remaining American gold reserves. Approval would signal open season on the rest. Treasury Secretary John Connally walked into the Oval Office with projections. If current redemption rates continued, the United States would exhaust gold reserves within months. America would become the first major power to default on its currency obligations since the Great Depression. Richard Nixon faced a choice between humiliation and transformation. On August 15, 1971, Nixon addressed the nation on live television. He announced the temporary suspension of dollar-to-gold convertibility. He blamed international money speculators for attacking the dollar. He promised the measure would defend American workers against unfair foreign competition. The gold window closed forever. The suspension remains in effect 53 years later. Nixon's announcement sent shockwaves through currency markets. The dollar dropped against the German mark, the Japanese yen, and the Swiss franc. The fixed exchange rate system of Bretton Woods collapsed. Currencies began floating against each other based on market forces rather than gold parities. For 2 years following the announcement, the dollar entered freefall. Currency markets treated American money as suspect. Without gold backing, what gave the paper value? Inflation surged domestically. Consumer prices rose over 6% in 1973, then over 11% in 1974. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates to painful levels. The economy contracted while prices increased. Economists named the phenomenon stagflation. Treasury officials faced a structural problem they had never encountered. Under Bretton Woods, foreign governments held dollars because those dollars represented gold claims. With gold backing eliminated, why would any nation continue accumulating American currency? The answer required creating new demand. The Treasury needed something every nation required. Something priced exclusively in dollars, something impossible to avoid purchasing, something trading in such volumes it would absorb all the excess currency the Federal Reserve chose to print. In October 1973, OPEC nations announced an oil embargo against the United States in response to American support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War. Gasoline prices quadrupled within months. Americans waited in lines stretching for miles to fill their tanks. Fistfights broke out at gas stations. The economy contracted further. Nixon and his economic advisors saw catastrophe. Henry Kissinger saw opportunity. The embargo demonstrated Arab leverage over energy supplies. The gold crisis demonstrated American vulnerability without a commodity anchor. The solution required merging these two problems into a single arrangement. Henry Kissinger served simultaneously as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor in 1974. No American official had held both positions before. The Watergate scandal consumed Nixon's final months in office. The president delegated foreign policy entirely to his most trusted strategist. Kissinger understood connections others missed. He thought in systems. He identified pressure points. He recognized the interplay between energy markets, currency flows, and geopolitical alignment. The oil embargo had demonstrated OPEC's weapon. Arab producers could withhold supply and cripple Western economies. The weapon worked because no alternatives existed. The weapon worked because oil priced in any currency still required oil. Kissinger saw the flip side. Oil was the one commodity every industrial nation required. Whoever controlled the pricing currency controlled global finance. The United States needed a deal with the largest oil producer willing to negotiate. Saudi Arabia produced more crude than any nation except the Soviet Union. Saudi Arabia feared Soviet expansion into the Middle East. Saudi Arabia's royal family needed external protection against regional rivals and internal dissent. Saudi Arabia was vulnerable. Kissinger identified the leverage points. In December 1974, Kissinger dispatched Treasury Secretary William Simon to Jeddah. Simon traveled with a small team of Treasury officials and State Department liaisons. No reporters accompanied the delegation. No congressional oversight supervised the mission. The negotiations would remain secret. Simon carried instructions documented in State Department memoranda, now declassified and housed at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library. The mission parameters reflected Kissinger's strategic vision. The goal was not simply energy supply. The goal was monetary architecture. Simon met with Saudi King Faisal bin Abdulaziz Al Saud at the Royal Palace in Jeddah. Finance Minister Sheikh Ahmed Zaki Yamani participated in the technical discussions. The negotiations lasted 4 days. Interpreters translated between English and Arabic. Lawyers drafted terms. The final agreement contained 3 core provisions. First, Saudi Arabia would price all oil exports exclusively in US dollars. Every barrel leaving Saudi ports would carry a dollar denomination. Any nation purchasing Saudi crude would need to acquire dollars first. Japanese manufacturers would convert yen to dollars to buy Saudi oil. German automakers would convert marks to dollars. British utilities would convert pounds. This provision guaranteed permanent baseline demand for American currency regardless of U.S. economic performance. Second, Saudi Arabia would invest surplus oil revenues in United States Treasury securities. The kingdom would recycle petrodollars back into American government debt instruments. The Treasury would receive a captive buyer for bonds, notes, and bills. This provision meant foreign oil purchases would effectively finance American budget deficits. Money leaving America to buy Saudi oil would return to America as loans to the federal government. Third, the United States would provide comprehensive military protection to the Saudi royal family. American forces would defend the kingdom against external invasion and help suppress internal threats to the monarchy. The United States would sell advanced weapon systems to the kingdom. This provision transformed an economic arrangement into a security alliance. The Saudis bought protection with oil pricing. America bought oil pricing with protection. The Saudi Arabian Monetary Agency established special accounts at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York to execute the arrangement. These accounts would receive incoming petrodollar investments and channel them into Treasury securities. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York archives contain records of this special arrangement in their historical documentation. King Faisal demanded one additional term. The Treasury Department would never disclose Saudi holdings of American debt. The exact amounts would remain classified. Saudi citizens and clerics would not learn how deeply the kingdom depended on American financial instruments. This secrecy protected the royal family from domestic criticism. The Treasury honored this demand for 41 years. Saudi Arabia appeared on Treasury International Capital reports only as part of aggregated oil exporters' totals. The true scale of Saudi investment in American debt remained hidden from public view and congressional oversight until 2016. William Simon returned to Washington with the signed agreement. He briefed Kissinger. Kissinger briefed President Ford, who had taken office after Nixon's resignation. The terms stayed classified. By 1975, every OPEC member nation had adopted dollar pricing for oil exports. The precedent Saudi Arabia established became industry standard. Negotiations between the United States and other Gulf producers followed the Saudi template. Dollar pricing spread to Nigeria, Indonesia, Venezuela, and every significant oil exporter. Any nation seeking to purchase oil from any major producer anywhere on Earth required dollars. The system created self-reinforcing demand. Nations exported goods to earn dollars. They used those dollars to purchase oil. They held excess dollars in reserve for future energy purchases. Central banks accumulated dollar reserves not because they trusted American economic management, but because they needed fuel. The Bretton Woods system had anchored the dollar to gold stored in vaults. The petrodollar system anchored the dollar to energy flowing through pipelines. The new anchor proved more durable. The petrodollar agreement solved America's immediate currency crisis. It also created a financial machine producing benefits no Treasury official had fully anticipated. When oil prices rose, exporting nations accumulated larger dollar surpluses. Those surpluses had to go somewhere. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the UAE held more dollars than their domestic economies could absorb. Investing those dollars required parking them in large liquid markets. The U.S. Treasury market was the largest and most liquid in the world. Petrodollars flowed into Treasury securities by design. The mechanism operated automatically. Saudi Arabia earned $100 billion in oil revenues during a given year. The Saudi Arabian Monetary Agency deposited $40 or $50 billion in Treasury bonds, notes, and bills. The U.S. government spent those billions on military equipment, domestic programs, or interest payments on existing debt. The dollars circulated back into the global economy through trade and aid. Foreign nations earned those dollars by selling goods to Americans. Those nations used the dollars to purchase oil. The cycle repeated indefinitely. The Congressional Budget Office documented this recycling effect in studies throughout the late 1970s and 1980s. Analysts traced petrodollar flows through the financial system. They measured impacts on interest rates, inflation, and balance of payments. The recycling structure produced several strategic advantages invisible to ordinary citizens, but obvious to Treasury officials. American consumers paid for oil in their own currency. They never incurred currency exchange costs. European consumers converted euros or pounds to dollars before purchasing petroleum. Asian consumers converted yen or won. This conversion imposed friction costs on foreign buyers. American manufacturers enjoyed structural advantages in energy input expenses. The Federal Reserve gained extraordinary flexibility in monetary policy. Other central banks held dollar reserves and dollar-denominated securities as a matter of operational necessity. When the Fed expanded the money supply, foreign holders absorbed much of the inflationary effect. America exported inflation to trading partners who had no choice but to hold the expanding currency. Domestic price increases stayed lower than money supply growth would otherwise produce. The Treasury sold debt instruments at lower interest rates than economic fundamentals warranted. Foreign governments purchased treasuries not primarily for yield, but for liquidity and necessity. They needed dollar-denominated assets because they needed dollars for energy purchases. This captive buyer base reduced American borrowing costs by measurable amounts. The government borrowed more cheaply than any comparable debtor. The Bank for International Settlements tracked the transformation in annual reports from their Basel headquarters. Eurodollar markets expanded from roughly $50 billion in 1970 to over $500 billion by 1980. International banking restructured around dollar-denominated transactions. The entire global financial system reorganized to accommodate petrodollar flows. American investment banks opened branches in London, Zurich, Tokyo, and Singapore, specifically to handle petrodollar recycling. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Chase Manhattan built global operations processing recycled oil wealth. Wall Street grew because petrodollars needed management. The financial sector expanded its share of GDP because the petrodollar system required financial intermediation. The International Monetary Fund documented the effects in special drawing rights analyses. The dollar maintained reserve currency status not through faith in American fiscal discipline, but through structural necessity. Every nation needed energy. Every major energy transaction required dollars. Every central bank accumulated dollars to ensure energy access. The system also concentrated pressure points and created vulnerabilities for potential challengers. Any nation attempting to sell oil in currencies other than dollars would face immediate American attention. The arrangement required conformity. Defection threatened the entire architecture. Iraq under Saddam Hussein announced plans to price oil exports in euros in November 2000. The United Nations Oil for Food program converted Iraqi accounts from dollars to euros. For over 2 years, Iraq traded oil outside the dollar system. By March 2003, American troops invaded Iraq. The Coalition Provisional Authority converted Iraqi oil sales back to dollar pricing within weeks of establishing control. The new government in Baghdad returned to petrodollar participation without question. Libya followed a parallel trajectory. Colonel Muammar Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed currency called the African dinar for continental oil trade in 2009 and 2010. He held conversations with African and Arab leaders about abandoning dollar pricing for petroleum. He advocated a unified African currency backed by Libyan gold reserves. In March 2011, NATO forces began air operations against Gaddafi's government. By October, Libyan rebels had killed Gaddafi in the desert outside Sirte. The new government in Tripoli returned Libyan oil to dollar markets immediately. The pattern established expectations. Nations attempting to exit petrodollar arrangements faced military intervention, economic sanctions, or regime change. The consequences disciplined other potential defectors. No major oil exporter tested the boundaries after Libya. In January 1980, President Jimmy Carter addressed a joint session of Congress. The Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan 1 month earlier. Soviet forces now positioned within striking distance of the Persian Gulf. Carter responded with doctrine. An attempt by any outside force to gain control of the Persian Gulf region will be regarded as an assault on the vital interests of the United States of America, and such an assault will be repelled by any means necessary, including military force. The Carter Doctrine did not mention oil by name. It did not need to. Every diplomat and general understood the subtext. The Persian Gulf contained over half of global proven oil reserves at the time. Those reserves traded in dollars. American financial stability required uninterrupted flow through the Strait of Hormuz. Carter established the Rapid Deployment Joint Task Force to enforce the doctrine. The force drew units from all service branches. The mission focused exclusively on Gulf contingencies. Ronald Reagan expanded this force into United States Central Command in 1983. CENTCOM became the primary military instrument protecting petrodollar infrastructure. The command represented an innovation in American military organization. Previous unified commands focused on geographic regions defined by potential adversaries. CENTCOM focused on a region defined by resources. CENTCOM headquarters sat in Tampa, Florida. The area of responsibility stretched from Egypt to Pakistan, from Kazakhstan to Kenya. 20 countries fell under CENTCOM jurisdiction. Every major oil-producing nation of the Middle East and Central Asia answered to American military planning. CENTCOM commanders became the most operationally active generals in the armed forces. The military buildup accelerated through the 1980s. The U.S. Navy maintained carrier strike groups in the Arabian Sea on permanent rotation. No other nation sustained such forward deployment. The Fifth Fleet established headquarters in Bahrain in 1995, but American naval presence predated formal basing by decades. Bahrain provided port facilities, repair capabilities, and command infrastructure for operations throughout the Gulf. The Air Force opened bases in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar became the largest American air installation in the Middle East. Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia hosted fighter squadrons and command elements. Kuwait's Ali al-Salam and Ahmed al-Jaber bases provided forward positioning. Army logistics hubs spread across the region. Prepositioned stocks of tanks, vehicles, ammunition, and supplies allowed rapid reinforcement. The military could surge forces to the Gulf faster than to any other region on Earth. In November 2023, Saudi Arabia accepted yuan payment for crude deliveries to Chinese refineries. The first non-dollar Saudi oil sales since the 1974 agreement had occurred. The transaction volume remained small relative to total Saudi exports. Both governments framed the deal as experimental. Both governments watched American response. Both governments measured consequences. Consequences proved limited. The Biden administration issued no sanctions. No military repositioning occurred. The precedent stood. Russia's experience accelerated the calculations. Following the February 2022 invasion of Ukraine, Western nations imposed comprehensive sanctions on Russia. European Union members banned Russian oil imports. The SWIFT banking network excluded major Russian financial institutions. The United States, European Union, Japan, and allied nations froze Russian central bank reserves held in their jurisdictions. The frozen amount totaled approximately $300 billion in foreign exchange holdings Russia had accumulated over decades. The asset freeze shocked observers worldwide. Central bank reserves had historically enjoyed immunity from seizure. Nations held foreign currency precisely because such holdings appeared safe. The precedent demonstrated Washington's willingness to weaponize dollar infrastructure against adversaries. Russia adapted rather than collapsed. India purchased Russian crude oil in rupees through bilateral arrangements. Chinese refineries purchased in yuan. Russia demanded payment in rubles from unfriendly nations seeking to continue gas purchases. Alternative payment channels developed. The world's third largest oil exporter had exited the petrodollar system under Western pressure. Russia survived the transition. The economy contracted but stabilized. Energy exports continued flowing to willing buyers. Other nations watched Russia endure. They noted the possibilities. The BRICS alliance expanded in January 2024 to include Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Iran, Egypt, and Ethiopia. The expanded grouping controlled over 40% of global oil production. The membership roster read as a challenged dollar hegemony. Summit discussions in Johannesburg and subsequent meetings focused on alternative payment systems. Technical working groups examined settlement mechanisms outside SWIFT. Currency swap arrangements proliferated among members. The architecture of a parallel financial system took shape. The dollar system built in 1974 now faces structural challenges unlike any in its 50-year existence. China offers an alternative customer base for oil exporters seeking diversification. Chinese refineries process over 14 million barrels per day and growing. Chinese energy demand will expand as electrification spreads and industrialization continues in interior provinces. American demand will plateau or decline as electric vehicle adoption accelerates and efficiency standards tighten. The customer of the future speaks Mandarin. Russia demonstrates survival outside dollar arrangements. Initial predictions of Russian economic collapse proved wrong. The ruble stabilized after sanctions shock. Inflation moderated. Energy export revenues continued through alternative channels. The example erodes fear of American financial retaliation among nations considering diversification. BRICS coordination provides diplomatic cover for de-dollarization moves. A single nation challenging dollar pricing faces isolation and pressure. A coalition of nations representing half of global population shares the risk. Numbers provide protection. The Federal Reserve has maintained interest rates above 5% since 2023 to combat domestic inflation. High rates attract foreign capital to dollar assets, supporting the currency. They also stress emerging market economies carrying dollar-denominated debt. Servicing existing obligations becomes more expensive. Some nations face incentives to reduce future dollar exposure, simply to reduce interest costs. The current tensions between Israel and Iran occur against this backdrop. Any regional war risks reshaping alignments the petrodollar system depends upon. Saudi Arabia normalized relations with Iran through Chinese mediation in 2023, an agreement reached without American involvement. A conflict forcing Saudi Arabia to choose between American and Chinese partnerships creates risks previous administrations never managed. American strategists face a problem without precedent. Military force protected the petrodollar system when challengers were isolated and weak. Saddam Hussein commanded a nation of 25 million with an economy crippled by sanctions. Gaddafi commanded a nation of 6 million with outdated military equipment. Neither posed existential risk. China commands a nation of 1.4 billion people. China possesses nuclear weapons. China operates the largest industrial economy on Earth. China holds over $3 trillion in foreign exchange reserves. China builds aircraft carriers and hypersonic missiles. The old enforcement methods do not apply. The military option against a challenger of this scale does not exist. Some analysts argue the petrodollar system will survive through inertia. Dollar infrastructure dominates global finance. SWIFT processes the majority of international transactions. Euro-dollar markets in London, Singapore, and Hong Kong hold trillions in deposits. Oil contract conventions embed dollar pricing. Conversion costs for alternatives remain high. Network effects favor incumbents. These arguments contain validity. They also contain complacency. The British pound sterling dominated global finance for over a century before the dollar replaced it. Sterling served as the reserve currency of international trade throughout the Victorian and Edwardian eras. British banks denominated global commerce. The City of London cleared transactions worldwide. The transition to dollar dominance occurred faster than contemporary observers expected. World War I damaged British finances. World War II exhausted them. The transition happened within 30 years. A system appearing permanent in 1914 had ended by 1945. Wars and debt accumulation accelerated the shift from sterling to dollars. America currently carries $34 trillion in federal debt. Annual deficits exceed $1 trillion. Interest payments on existing debt now exceed the entire military budget. The fiscal position resembles late-stage imperial overextension by historical comparison. If oil exporting nations reduce Treasury purchases significantly, interest rates must rise to attract replacement buyers. Higher rates increase deficit spending on interest payments. Larger deficits require more Treasury issuance. More issuance requires more buyers. Fewer captive buyers exist. The cycle accelerates toward crisis. The petrodollar system was not a natural market outcome. Free markets did not create dollar oil pricing. Strategic negotiation created it. Diplomatic pressure maintained it. Military force enforced it. Arrangements created through leverage expire when leverage shifts. Henry Kissinger understood this when he negotiated the original deal. He offered Saudi Arabia security guarantees because he understood dependence required reciprocity. The Saudis needed American military protection against regional rivals and internal dissent. America needed Saudi dollar pricing to preserve currency demand. Both sides gained from the arrangement. Both sides depended on the arrangement. The current Saudi leadership weighs different calculations than King Faisal faced in 1974. Iran no longer threatens direct invasion since the Iran-Iraq War exhausted both nations. The Yemen conflict demonstrated Saudi military limitations despite massive equipment purchases. Climate change threatens long-term oil demand as the world transitions toward alternative energy. China offers economic partnership without conditions, Washington attaches. The value proposition of exclusive American alignment has weakened. Mohammed bin Salman pursues Vision 2030, a program to diversify Saudi Arabia away from oil dependence before oil demand peaks globally. The Crown Prince needs investment partners. China offers infrastructure expertise. China offers technology transfer. China offers a market of 1.4 billion consumers. The calculus shifts. The history contained in this account explains the present you inhabit. American military bases across the Middle East do not exist to fight terrorism. Terrorism threatens buildings and people. Terrorism does not threaten currency systems. The bases do not exist to spread democracy. Democracy does not require aircraft carriers patrolling the Strait of Hormuz. The bases exist to protect the 1974 agreement and its extensions. Every carrier strike group, every drone base, every special operations deployment, every arms sale, every diplomatic mission serves the same underlying function, maintaining dollar demand through energy control. The purpose is monetary. The military is the instrument. This arrangement has financed American living standards for 50 years. Your mortgage rates stayed low because foreign governments recycled oil wealth into Treasury securities. Foreign capital bought American debt. Foreign demand suppressed American interest rates. You benefited without knowing the mechanism. Your consumer goods stayed cheap because the dollar maintained purchasing power through artificial demand. Currency strength made imports affordable. The system subsidized consumption. Your government borrowed without apparent consequence because creditors had no alternative to dollar assets. Foreign central banks bought treasuries because they needed dollars, need compelled purchase. The consequences of petrodollar erosion would reach your household directly. Higher interest rates on all borrowing as replacement buyers demand higher yields. Reduced purchasing power for imported goods as currency strength fades. Inflation pressures the Federal Reserve struggles to contain as foreign holders dump dollar assets. Government spending cuts or tax increases as debt service consumes larger budget shares. The men who negotiated the 1974 agreement are dead or elderly. William Simon died in 2000. Henry Kissinger died in 2023. King Faisal was assassinated in 1975. The negotiators have passed. The agreement they created remains alive in every transaction you complete. The system faces challenges unlike any in its 50-year existence. The architecture shows stress fractures. Saudi Arabia experiments with yuan payments. Russia exports oil outside dollar channels. BRICS discusses alternative settlement systems. China offers partnership without conditions. The coming years will determine whether the architecture built in 1974 holds or fractures. The outcome shapes your financial future in ways no domestic policy decision will match. Presidential elections, congressional legislation, Federal Reserve interest rate decisions. All of these matter less than the stability of petrodollar arrangements. This is why understanding the secret deal matters. This is why the history connects to your life. This is why 50-year-old documents from the Ford Presidential Library explain your grocery bill and your mortgage payment. The money trail leads here. The power structure begins here. Everything flows from the agreement signed in secret between American and Saudi officials 50 years ago in a Jeddah palace. Now you understand what they never taught you in school.